They saw what was being asked of them, and it's like, so now if a girl using her shower locker room, after gym class or after sports, comes after me and says there's a guy in there, claims to be a girl, but he's got all the moving parts,
Oh man, yeah.
in the shower with me, I have rights too. What's up? That I'm actually supposed to reprimand her and not the guy. And it's like they saw no way around it. They talked to who they talked to, and they quit to a lower position again rather than having to defend that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And, in America, we are fortunate. We have a First Amendment. We have ground to stand on. I have been told by attorneys from Europe, Australia, whatever, talking about, how difficult it is trying to formulate an argument to support right and truth in a country that doesn't have an equivalent of the U.S. First Amendment.
Time to stand up and be counted in this generation.
I think we've made our battle flesh and blood. Our problem is spiritual.
The fact is that America is really at a crisis point.
God says you can either love the world or you can love God.
Pastors are presenting their audience with a playbook that's outside of Scripture with a Christian label.
There's only one that can save America, and he's not sitting in the White House.
Welcome back to the One Hope for America podcast. I'm really excited about this moment here. Obviously, this is a new set. This is a different studio. We're in the More Revolution office right now, and this is going to be a really powerful session. I have my friend here, Dr. André Van Mol, and Dr. André Van Mol has been leading the charge with some other allies and associates on confronting gender ideology in America and the nations, really. And so let me just read this here so I get this right. You're a part of the American College of Pediatricians, and you just stood with some allied groups at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., last week?
Right.
You guys released the Declaration Protecting Children. This is a really big deal. So you're part of the American College of Pediatricians and an allied group who just last week stood at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and released the Declaration Protecting Children.
Yeah, the Doctors Protecting Children Declaration, and it was a work of American College of Pediatricians, Christian Medical and Dental Association, several other allied groups, kind of hands across the aisle kind of effort.
This is so good. This is a really big deal because, a lot of us, we're just sitting here watching what's going on with the gender confusion happening in schools and teachers and affirming kids in these gender ideologies, and a lot of us normal people are sitting around going, what is going on? Where's anybody who's saying this is okay? Dr. Van Mol and his associates are the guys who have been really piecing together the scientific evidence to stand and say there's no evidence to back gender ideology. Is there a better way of saying that?
No, that's fine, but in particular, no evidence to support any benefit to gender transition procedures that they like to call gender-affirming health care, so-called.
Yeah. So we're going to just play the clip of Dr. Van Mol's 2-minute presentation of this declaration from last week in D.C. Here you go. Watch this.
Gender dysphoria is a diagnosis, whereas transgenderism is an ideology. The natural course of gender dysphoria is desistance by adulthood, conservatively in 85% of the cases, unless it is affirmed. Gender dysphoria carries with it the overwhelming probability of underlying mental health issues, adverse family dynamics, adverse childhood experiences, and autism spectrum disorder that usually predate the gender dysphoria itself. The probability of both desistance and underlying mental health and other issues is why watchful waiting, coupled with mental health evaluation and counseling for both patient and family, was once and is increasingly again recognized as the standard of care for minors with gender dysphoria. Systematic literature reviews done in the United Kingdom, Sweden, Finland, and Germany show that so-called gender-affirming healthcare is out of step with the evidence base for gender dysphoric youth. Transition affirmation is not proven to be safe or effective long-term. It does not reduce suicides. It does not repair mental health issues or trauma. Minors cannot give truly informed consent. Children have developing and immature brains. Their minds change often. They are prone to risk-taking. They are vulnerable to peer pressure, and they don't grasp long-term consequences. Refusing to provide gender transition procedures, or so-called gender-affirming healthcare, is non-discriminatory and is appropriate both professionally and scientifically. Withholding unproven interventions is non-discriminatory, and gender-affirming healthcare has neither been shown to be safe nor effective nor of more help than harm. Physicians take an oath to do no harm, and gender-affirming healthcare is documented to lead to harm. There are good mental health alternatives to gender-affirming healthcare, which address underlying issues rather than dodging them. Finally, there is always a more honest way to deal with gender confusion than the chemical sterilization and surgical mutilation of healthy young bodies.
So there you have it. That's amazing. Thank you for standing. Thank you for doing that. And this is a really big deal. If you don't know, Elon Musk and Dr. Jordan Peterson both tweeted about this.
Right.
And one of the clips had, like, as of a few days ago, you said
54 million views.
Come on, this is awesome. And then the other one was 800,000.
Right.
And so let's pray it just goes all over the world to be seen. But first, let's talk about, like, definitions. So in pastors, parents, leaders, we're watching this right now, like, help us understand, because it's just like, it feels like there's so many definitions and they change every week. So, I mean, like,
yeah.
What,
Well, you know, the language has been weaponized in this and so many other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we need to kind of, you know, engage the fight to clarify definitions, because if you sit back and let culture and the very well-trained people in culture make the definitions for you, you begin the discussion painted into a corner and on thin ice, you know, because it's, again, weaponized language, it's their rule book, don't agree to it.
Mm-hmm.
So sex is a biological fact that's determined at fertilization, at conception.
Mm-hmm.
It's a decision made for you. You have no say, right? God created us male and female. That's scripture, and it's a scientific fact even for an atheist.
Yes.
Right? Gender, you know, really historically, you know, nouns had gender. You know, people have a sex, but people like, you know, Kinsey, Alfred Kinsey, and, you know, other people in the mid 20th century started playing this game that, well, you know, gender isn't necessarily the same as your sex, and that's been ideology since day one. But, you know, it's gospel, you know, for these people that preach this stuff now. So don't buy off on that. But that is what they're saying, that your sex and your gender can be two different things. Why? Well, because of gender identification. Well, wait a minute. Identification happens here. It doesn't make it reality. It's just your thought process about things. Well, what about gender dysphoria? That's what we're talking about with, you know, kids that are really troubled, you know, about this. Excuse me. So gender dysphoria is a diagnosis. Transgenderism is an ideology. And
Okay.
people need to understand that,
Yes.
understand the difference, and play hardball on that. You know, they're two different things. And the gender ideologues have been there for some time. It's part of the whole sexual revolution. It was leading to this, and what this is leading to is transhumanism. The idea that, you know, whatever your physical reality is doesn't matter. You know, we can do better. And with that, we see, oh, well, that's a spirituality too. That's Gnosticism. The idea that the physical world really isn't the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is whatever we make here. And Gnosticism was also the first heresy that the early church dealt with.
Right.
So it's like, it didn't go away, did it? Right?
Yeah, totally.
So, you know, again, that's the little playbook of the definitions we're dealing with here. Sex, gender, gender identification, gender dysphoria, transgenderism, and now your listeners know the difference.
Yeah. All right. So gender ideology, gender dysphoria. Let's talk about gender dysphoria. So a kid comes, a 13-year-old, comes home, looks at his parents and says, I know I was born a girl, but I feel like I'm supposed to be a boy. And break that down for us in that sense.
And it gets, you know, kind of complex, because if we were talking about this 20 years ago, you know, different language would be used. Instead of gender dysphoria, it would be gender identity disorder.
Okay.
and we'd understand, gosh, there's something wrong with that, you know. And of course, now the thing is, there's nothing wrong with anything, you know, where we've become the cult of affirmation, and mental health is leading the way in that. I'm sorry to say, you know, Western mental health has fallen down on the job badly on this.
Which is crazy because, like, they use words like mental health, but it is the farthest thing from mental health.
Right.
Which is why we have to be really have discernment through all of this and understand.
And what's happened in the past 20 years, because it was, you know, generally, you know, biological natal males presenting with this, and there's been this big 180. It's vast majority females. Well, what changed? It wasn't biology. It wasn't genetics. You know. Well, obviously, it's, you know, ideology. So, for someone to have gender dysphoria means they're very uncomfortable. You know, this is a problem with this in their head. Whereas someone might not be dysphoric at all. It's like, oh, I think we're dealing more with the fad, you know, social contagion.
Yes.
And, you know, if you look up like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM-5, and now it's like DSM-5R, whatever we're up to, there it would say the prevalence of gender dysphoria in natal males is maximally 15 one-thousandths of 1%. For natal females, maximally 3 one-thousandths of a percent. Well, you know, all kinds of surveys in the past 2-3 years show it's easily 2%. Some school districts, like one, I think, outside of Philly, it's 20%. Well, there's just no way that it's that high. So something else is going on. And we hear about, like, cheerleading squads in high schools where, you know, 4 of the girls come out as trans. Well, that would be statistically impossible. So, you know, that's not thousandths of 1%. So something else is going on. And the other side gets very angry when we talk about, you know, social contagion and stuff like that. Oh, you're just trying to erase us. It's like, no, you're erasing yourself. You know, you need to come to the light of dawn on this.
Yeah.
And so looking back at the gender dysphoria part, this is some of the things I talked about in my presentation at the National Press Club there.
Yeah.
There's certain things, you know, we know, one of which is the overwhelming probability that there's underlying mental health problems, adverse childhood experiences, you know, traumas, stuff like that. Bad family dynamics, even sometimes in the best of families, you didn't even know it was a bad dynamic kind of thing. And autism spectrum disorder, way over the percentages it should be in the general population. Well, why is that? Well, you know, one thought on it is, you know, autism spectrum kids and adults, they don't do well with abstractions. They like to think in very concrete terms. And with coaching from the web, which is all too easy to get, they come up with this very wrong conclusion. Now I know why I'm different than my friends. It's because I'm trans. It's like, no, Johnny, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
You know, but they lock onto that, and it's hard to get them to let go. And the second thing we know, besides the probability of underlying problems, is the overwhelming probability of desistance by adulthood. The natural course of gender dysphoria is that it goes away by adulthood if you don't mess with it.
85%, right?
Conservatively, 85% of the time. And I got a big list of studies that, you know, back that up.
Yeah.
But if you affirm it, that derails natural desistance. And why wouldn't it? You know, all the authority figures in this child's life are saying, oh, yeah, you probably are trans. Well, what's the kid to think?
Right.
Okay? And the schools are pushing it. In fact, the schools in America are considered the #1 driver besides the web. You know, like in California, it's mandated in sex ed and other things. You think, in California, you can opt out.
Right.
You know, certain sex ed things. Oh, but look at the other laws. You cannot opt out of anything that's LGBTQA, right?
Right.
That and it's integrated into all kinds of other subjects.
Yes.
And, you know, they're teaching this stuff like in Head Start in California, kids that aren't in, you know, kindergarten yet. There's no way a kid has the wherewithal to resist this. So this will be, you know, the first mention in their life of it. And the law of first mention is the first way you hear about something tends to be how you judge it for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
So parents need to be front and center and have the conversations.
Yes.
Be the first.
That's so good. So I've watched, you have other YouTube videos where you're talking about all of this stuff, and I've watched a lot of them. Social contagion.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that one for just a second, and then I want to go back to the law first mentioned there.
Yeah.
Social contagion. So the percentage of a child actually being trans is so minimal and so small.
And let me correct you on that too.
Yes, please.
There is no trans.
Right.
Trans is an ideology.
Yes.
Gender dysphoria is a diagnosis. But it will come at everybody with the word trans. So they need to understand that.
Yeah.
Right? Say, oh, this is an ideology. Started with the T word. It's ideology.
Yes. Okay. So it's like so rare. So what's happening is it's the social contagion from culture and largely from schools.
Education, media, entertainment industry, it like never stops. And, with these, smartphones and everything, the kids have never known anything but a world like this. And this comes at them. There is no hiding. There is no safe space.
Right.
And that's even mentioned in the CAS review final report out of the UK, that was 4 years in the making, assessing all the literature on this. And they not only assessed the literature, they spoke to different interest groups. They went full spectrum over 4 years to get all the information together, as the UK has decided that, wow, this so-called gender-affirming healthcare, gender transition procedures, that's not going to be available to minors in the UK anymore. This is an unproven, experimental, potentially bad thing. With rare, like nobody under 16. From 16 to 18, it's going to be with rare exception, highly selected cases, exclusively in the context of an experimental framework, closely watched. So, and, they've done this. And of course, because this was, the final report was just released, this has been taken up by England, Wales, Scotland, all made the same decision. Sweden already made that decision. Finland already made that decision based on their comprehensive literature reviews.
Yeah.
Germany just had a comprehensive literature review out this year. And Denmark, based on the weight of what they saw from Sweden, Finland, the UK, has also done a 180, and other nations are considering it. So, no one's going to look, by the way, at Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and the UK and say, oh, it's conservative politics, it's conservative Christians.
Right.
Well, really, from where?
Right.
This is very much, what we might call the secular left, just looking at the hard data and saying, wow.
There's no evidence.
What we have been
science.
lead engines in promoting isn't really backed up. When they say these studies, and these are the consistent results of these comprehensive literature reviews, these systematic reviews, they find that the literature, that claims to prove this stuff is all of low to very low quality, low to very low certainty. And by definition, that means it does not prove what it says it does. It's rather the opposite. So, but the U.S., the whole trans thing is big ideology meeting big money. And the U.S. leads it. It's us.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. And WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, is the big dog. They're not a scientific organization. They're not a medical one. They're not a legal one, but they play like they are. And they've been putting out their so-called standards of care, SOC. And the SOC 7 that was out since, I lose track, 2014 or so, is what a lot of nations based their policies on this on. Well, SOC 8 just came out about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it was the first one to have a literature review. Mind you, you're on SOC 8. This is the first one to have a literature review. And it's not comprehensive, though they claim it is. It's really cherry picking. It's kind of junk.
Gotcha.
And in the year since this came out, they've lost 60% of their members. It's like, really? If this is so strong, if this is such science, how come your members are like flying the coop?
Yeah, bailing.
And how come you refuse to testify in defense of it? For example, when the state of Florida subpoenas you, or Alabama, you get some judge to give you a stay. And the same is true with some of the other organizations pushing this. And it's like, if it's so great, if it's so convincing, defend it in court. We have to. Let's see you do it.
Right.
And we know why you're not doing it.
Yes.
Right.
So these organizations are they're acting like an authority when they have no base to stand on, and that's part of what's driving this
And
ideology.
they double down on the language. Science shows, overwhelming improvement in mental
it's like,
health.
show me the science, and they won't.
Overwhelming reduction in suicidality, and none of those are true.
Right. Talk about that one. So they'll say that let a kid try. The classic line: would you rather plan a transition or plan a funeral.
Yeah, would you
It's how they
rather have a
manipulate.
live son or a dead daughter? Yeah, that's emotional blackmail.
Completely.
And, you know, if a kid comes out, and we have on tape and stories, but which mean articles, out of Canada, out of the UK, Ireland, out of the US, counselors who say they tell their clients, I just tell them you're going to commit suicide. That'll get you to your transition fast. Like, wow, how do you still have a license?
Evil.
You know?
Totally.
Yeah, it is. But, you know, here's the thing. There's no evidence that transition in any form, social transition, which is just you change your name, you know, change your appearance. Anybody can do that in a day. You know, puberty blocking, that's only applicable to certain ages. Cross-sex hormones, which are really wrong-sex hormones, or if you go with what used to be called sex reassignment surgery, became gender-affirming surgery, became, no kidding, gender-confirming surgery. So again, how weaponized the language is. So the 4 stages of transition, again, social, puberty blocking, cross-sex hormones, sex reassignment surgery.
Yeah.
That, you know, any part of that greatly reduces suicides. No, they don't. And a
Right.
big pile of bad studies doesn't equal one good one, but they act like it does. And again, we have all kinds of other studies, you know, like, you know, out of, you know, Finland and Germany and so forth, looking at, you know, their gender clinics. And they're showing, especially one out of Germany, I think, showed, you know, it's not social transition or social acceptance that really improves mental health. It's your relationship with your family and your peers. Oh, so for example, you have a very loving Christian family that does not agree with your position,
Yes.
but loves you still. That's more important than you socially transitioning.
Right.
Oh, but that's sure not the way it's presented, is it?
Yeah.
You know, in fact, kind of on a different topic, and the names will remain anonymous, but a colleague of mine was at a conference in an elevator with one of the very well-known sex researchers, psychology professors, you know, very gay identified person. And this guy was telling other colleagues in the elevators, you know, I wish all the parents were Christians because they're the ones that believe in loving no matter what.
Wow.
It's like, wow, where's that in print? You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Dr. Van Mol, Dr. Van Mol, as a doctor, what would your advice be to school boards, principals, superintendents, teachers, who are feeling the pressure of you better affirm this, you know, and from your perspective, it's just like from a medical doctor perspective, what would you say to school boards and teachers that are?
Yeah. See, we're in California, the grand land of or else. I mean, all this stuff is in legislation.
Right.
So you say no, you are picking a fight, you are picking a lawsuit, which is exactly what we need.
Yes.
We don't need more schools simply finding a way around this, which, you know, by the way, even in California, that's what a lot of them do. I've, you know, firsthand accounts I've heard. Okay, here's what the state is saying sex ed is supposed to be for these kids. Got it?
Trash.
Teacher puts it in a drawer and never looks at it again. That's a courageous teacher.
Yeah.
And they're not all believers, but they tend to be who do that.
And it's like, pick your fight.
This is it.
Yeah.
So I have advised some school boards, I'll keep the names out of it. One of them is one of the 5 largest ones in the state. And they have courageous, you know, superintendents and board members, and they fought the good fight. There's other school districts that have made the news because the state has sued them for, like, we're not going along with this. You know, if a kid changes name and presentation, we are letting the parents know because the parents have responsibility for these
Right.
things.
Yeah.
And the state would, you know, want to make that illegal, right? And so they do. So, you know, I would say, you know, science is with you. We're in a point in time where good science, good theology, and good ethics are the same, but
Yes.
you need to know them.
Yes.
And they won't come to you that way in general culture. So you make your stand, you know, based on the ethical principles, the First Amendment. We have so many things supporting us in the U.S., right? And a lot of these things just need to go to court. But, you know, the deal is we view each person as an individual. Everyone matters. We don't do identity politics in school because otherwise everybody's not equal. What identity politics means is there's a totem pole, and someone's going to be on top, and you may be the flavor of the month, but you don't get to be the flavor of the month for very long. So you're actually endangering these people's rights by handling it this way. It needs to be everybody's the same, everyone has the same protection and rights. Actually, here, I'm kind of getting onto the legal thing, which maybe is not my business to do on your thing here. But there's legal organizations there to help you: Alliance Defending Freedom, Pacific Justice Institute, Liberty Counsel, Beckett, FIRE is a different one. There's several of them. And now First Liberties, I think, out of Washington, D.C. I've been in contact with them on some cases.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So, stand the ground, have the courage of your moral conviction, be protecting these kids. I have spoken to teachers, I have spoken to people that were at the superintendent or sub-superintendent level that quit. They saw what was being asked of them, and it's like, so now if a girl using her shower locker room, after gym class or after sports, comes after me and says there's a guy in there, claims to be a girl, but he's got all the moving parts,
oh man, yeah,
in the shower with me, I have rights too. What's up? That I'm actually supposed to reprimand her and not the guy. And it's like they saw no way around it. They talked to who they talked to, and they quit to a lower position again, rather than having to defend that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's kind of down to the lawsuits, at this point. And, in America, we are fortunate. We have a First Amendment. We have ground to stand on. I have been told by attorneys from Europe, Australia, whatever, talking about, how difficult it is trying to formulate an argument to support right and truth in a country that doesn't have an equivalent of the U.S. First Amendment.
Yeah.
So
we need to take advantage of what we've been
and
given.
the other countries look to us, for however much you want to, hate America, spit at America,
Right.
oh, America this,
Right,
America's so
right.
arrogant. We lead the world for good or for bad. And California leads the nation for good or for bad. So that's why we fight the good fight here.
Yes.
Ultimately doing it right here and winning is going to help the people in Europe, in Australia, in Asia, wherever else.
Yeah.
But at the same token, it's like, all politics is local. Don't get a big head. Pay attention to what's right in front of you, and deal with things as you see them.
So we need. I'll speak. I'm not a doctor. I'll speak from my perspective. Is that we need some Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednegos to stand up.
It doesn't take many.
Yeah, it doesn't take many. It doesn't take a large. It's never the majority that flips things. It's always the courageous few.
Yeah, I've come to the sad realization that, again, talking with the core group that I work with on this and stuff, whenever, a different angle of this comes at us, that's just, I can't believe this, or why is it so hard to get other people involved? But for a lot of these things, it's just what you've said. Yeah. And I think it's kind of been that way at all times, for all people, for all things. It's a few, but the few get it moving, Well, look at any election. Who decides it? The mushy middle, the 10, 15%, the mushy middle.
Right.
So you don't necessarily need a majority to have a majority influence,
Yeah.
And in terms of, the secularists coming at this, what Christians have been telling them, Christian authors, scholars, theologians, whatever, how many decades have we've been saying, a less Christian America will not be a less religious one, and you won't like the religion that stands in to replace us. And now there's atheists repeating that. I remember reading one saying, I hated it when, my Christian friends would be saying, less Christian America won't be less religious. They're right. And I very much don't like what's replaced it. Woke is broke. Now what? And people look for courage. People follow courage. They don't follow cowardice. And for the situation we're in, in America and in the West, like everything else, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
Something else comes next.
Yeah.
And it'd be really nice if the others could be looking at the Christians when this has passed and say, not only were they right, they were courageous about it, and they were compassionate. Maybe they have something to say now.
Wow.
As
That's
opposed
really
to, why would you listen to Christians? They caved on this like they caved on everything else.
Come on.
You don't need that.
Yeah.
And it's the people watching who say nothing who are often the most influenced, like in debates. Two debaters, they don't walk away from a debate changing their mind.
Right.
That's super rare.
Right.
But the people in the crowd are looking, and they're looking for attitude, as much as they're looking for content. I know some, really powerful Christian scholars, Christians, of science and scholarship, who, when they go, debate atheist scientists, they say they know full well that there's some very quiet people listening who are waiting to see how the believer will respond to what's coming from the atheist, or for that matter, hecklers, in the crowd, who may actually be conservative Christians as well as atheists, depending on what the issue is, right? And when they see that you're not a jerk, and that you are informed, and that you can present in a civil and pleasant manner, that's when the real questions come up. Which otherwise, if they see you are a jerk, those questions are never going to be presented. So there's people watching, they always are, and they're not the hecklers. So, keep that in mind rather than being discouraged. Also, like everything else in life, it's co-laboring with Christ. He calls us to do it. It's like a dozen times in the New Testament. And if you're co-laboring with Christ, he's kind of shouldering most of the load. You're going to have to admit that one, You do your very best.
It's really good.
But that trust and faith that you moving forward is going to get somewhere. God's directing.
Yeah, that's really good. I remember I was talking to somebody one time when Martin Luther presented his thesis, or nailed it to the wall, and the Catholic Church brought him in and said, renounce all this. He said, I cannot in good conscience do that. And I love that reaction to the truth that he presented. I can't in good conscience do that. And I feel like there are teachers and people all over America right now who are saying, I can't in good conscience promote that. For example, I know one school here in Reading, I went in and I took a picture of all of the sex ed material that is being taught in a school. It was mind-blowing. I'm like, I cannot believe this is being presented. And I asked the vice principal about it. I said, have you guys read this? And he goes, oh, yeah. He said, none of us here at the school will teach it. So they send a nurse in to teach it for them. Yeah. And I'll never forget, I picked it was at my son's school, and I picked up my son. I signed him out, I didn't have him in sex ed, and there was another. So my son wasn't in that class, but there was another kid in there who I love, and I'm close to him. He was in the class. He didn't get signed out. And when I picked him up, he got my car, and he goes, Tom, I sat through a class today, it's sex ed, and he began to talk about it, and there was some confusion there, and he was just like, is it true that you can just kind of pick whatever gender you want? And I just pulled out my dad guns and blew the whole thing apart with truth. And within a few seconds, it was gone. But I had to expose this big war that's happening right now on kids. Yeah. And I feel like there are parents, Christians, leaders, pastors all over America that are standing up right now, and it's in silent. It's in these different places. But what would you say to pastors? What can they do from their pulpits to really cause effective change without being a jerk, and that? Don't dodge it. It's like so many other things in life that should be part of the Christian life. Here's the perspective on it. Here's what it means. Here's what it's about. So you don't dodge it. This is a problem I've seen in so many things in bioethics that, as you know, that's been one of my things, that and apologetics since I was a teenager, fire in the gut. And pastors and Christian teachers avoid these things because they don't view themselves as being, that informed in it. And they fear saying something wrong that will reflect badly on the gospel. So we stick to the gospel that we know well, and we avoid these social issues. Big mistake, because the gospel's all over the social issues. There's so much information to be had out there, from, good, reliable sources. I mean, look at the websites of the American College of, Pediatricians, which is a secular organization, but this stuff's very solid. Christian Medical and Dental Association. Other, all these different, activist groups that have the material there for you, and you don't,
have to spend 2 years familiarizing
And one of
yourself
the
with
most helpful things for me was watching your other videos on YouTube, because you had 200 sources you were citing with your evidence-based presentation.
Yeah, well, my talk on transgenderism, gender dysphoria is 400 sources, yeah.
There you go.
And on some other subjects, yeah, it's 200.
So that was helpful for me because you had the language in there, the definitions, and then you explained social contagion in there. And it's just like, as pastors, we have to be informed enough to be able to come at it, but then, and talk about it.
Simple is best, because, well, why do sermons reduce down to 3 points often? You want people to remember something when they walk out.
Right.
So, the fact that God created us male and female, well,
there you
when
go.
we were kids, that was like, so, yeah.
Just listen
now,
to Mr. Rogers.
That's threatening language. You know what I mean? It's counterculture, and Christianity's always been counterculture, so get comfortable with that.
Yes.
And you know that there are going to be, kids in the congregation struggling, or parents, or relatives that have family members that are struggling with that. So, how do you compassionately approach it? Like you compassionately approach anything else, or even, when it's in your face, then it's down to, I accept you as you are. I don't agree with you. How hard is that?
Right.
And don't have to win, at your first encounter. That ruins things when you reduce things to a win-loss scenario. Here's the truth. It's
That's
for
so
you.
good.
It's good for you.
And I love what you said just a minute ago. As pastors, as we're presenting the truth, it's just like being able to say, studies show that actually giving yourself to transition is not going to reduce your suicidal tendencies.
Yeah.
That's just a lie.
Let's give them some specifics. 2011 study out of Sweden, I don't know how to speak Swedish, so Danish is what we pronounce it as.
Yeah.
And they did a 30-year review of the records looking at everybody who had transitioned in Sweden. 324 people in that study.
Okay.
And they found that if you follow them 10 years out, not this 6-month, 1 year satisfaction survey baloney that most of these studies are.
Yeah.
You follow them 10 years out, they have a completed suicide rate 19 times that of the general population, 3 times the all-cause mortality, which means everything that can kill somebody, about 3 times the rate of psychiatric hospitalization. Does that sound like improvement to you?
No.
Well, now what the other side says, that's 2011, well, how about something modern? Fine. Brandstrom and Pachenkas, 2020. I was given an advance copy of this by Alliance Defending Freedom to generate a white paper for them on it for the Supreme Court case they were having at the time. Led to us publishing an article against it, and the journal took note. So what happened is Brandstrom and Pachenkas did a comprehensive electronic medical review. A lot of European countries keep records of everything. It's not a constitutional thing. And so they know what their stats are on things. And so they reviewed, these, and looking at 9.7, million records, they found that gender-affirming hormones and what they call gender-affirming surgery did not improve any of the benchmarks they looked at. Now, initially when the study came out, it said, well, hormones don't work, but surgery does. Well, I and others looked at it and said, wait a minute. The editors of this journal, when they got the letters, from me and several others, which were published together all in one day, they hired an outside team of statistical analysts. That doesn't happen very often. And they agreed with us largely. They had the authors redo their stats, and why don't you look at some things that weren't published, of course. And then when they looked at before and after for surgery, which, if you can believe it, most of these studies don't do that. They don't look at before and after. It's like, how can you have a conclusion without a before and after?
Yeah, totally. Right.
Yeah. And they found the gender-affirming surgery improved none of the benchmarks they looked at. None.
Yeah, the opposite, I'm sure.
So Brandstrom Pachenka shows that neither affirming hormones nor surgery improved the mental health benchmarks. A review that looked at 8.5 years of all military families and all adolescents with gender confusion that sought their care in the military. So something like 3,700 candidates. Those that went with gender-affirming hormones, higher rate of mental health problems, mental health facility usage, mental health medications, and suicidality. So, again, the other studies that say it helps. It's like 6 months, a year, and it's this self-survey, like how
Cherry
satisfied are you with your used car? Well, what's objective about that? Nothing. And they're still on the hormone high, or whatever. We've had so many regretters and detransitioners tell us, 1 or 2 years, I didn't even know what I had done to myself in that amount of time.
Seriously.
So, of course you answer the survey with whatever they want you to say. And other studies that have shown us that regretters and detransitioners, 75% of them never tell their doctor. It's like, wow. And they're highly likely never to go back to the gender clinic in the first place. So the clinic can say, oh, all the people seeing us are very happy.
Because nobody's telling.
Yeah, and you have to look at another part of the study to see that their loss to follow-up was 20 to 60%. Usually 20 to 60%. If we were doing, a study on a drug analysis and you lost 20% of your patients, your study is invalid.
Yes,
you'd
completely.
be knocking on doors to see what happened to people. So, and there's other studies to quote, but that's just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff we present, in high courts to legislators elsewhere, saying, there's nothing to back up this. Plus, the Cass review said very specifically in several parts of the review, we were hearing doctors and families saying, well, we have to get this to reduce suicidality. And they're like, we don't know where you got that idea from. It's not in the literature. It doesn't really support it.
Doesn't
right?
add up. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, let's say somebody comes and says, hey, my 14-year-old kid just came home and said they feel like a boy trapped in a girl's body. How do you counsel that parent?
Best, here, reminding everyone, I am not a counselor. I am not a therapist. I'm a board-certified family physician.
Yes.
But I've spoken to, some psychiatrists, psychologists, and in particular, some Christians in ministry who've dealt with this.
Yeah.
Number one is Walt Heyer,
Yeah.
He...
I've studied him, yeah.
Yeah, he, transitioned, lived that life for about 12 years or whatever, came to the Lord, got out of it. And since that time, he's been involved in ministry to these people. So I think he's talked to more people than anybody. And he says, there's these simple rules. One, be a listening sponge. You're going to be doing mostly listening. So this doesn't happen in one conversation. He says, these 5 to 10 minute conversations, you should plan on having 5 to 10 of them before you actually get to where you're going. And it's very easily messed up, because the people are dealing with a great deal of trained defensiveness and stuff. So he says, be a listening sponge, ask these open-ended questions. And stuff he advises is like, okay, you've hit on a topic here that's really interesting to me. Can you tell me more? Then, when they're going, it's like, was there a certain day that something happened that you just decided you weren't happy being who you are? And that's one's a uniform yes. There's always one thing that tipped the card for you, And was there anything in particular that made you feel that way? And here he says what you're looking for is, was there abuse, neglect? Did they feel weird? Feeling weird's a big thing. Kids don't get that all kids feel weird. That
Totally.
Social anxiety is like the number one thing in junior high.
Right.
It's normal. It's not abnormal.
I was always weird in 7th grade.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And, just on from there, building trust. 2018, Lisa Littman, very liberal gal, OB-GYN, Brown University, did the first of its kind, parental survey of parents who had kids with gender dysphoria. She ended up losing her job for it, ultimately. And they found these commonalities, and of course, a very high percentage of kids, already had mental health problems and stuff to deal with, But they found that once you have someone in your friend group who comes out as trans, your odds of doing the same go up 350%.
Social contagion, again.
Social contagion.
Yeah.
And, the idea of, what are we talking about with words like, the semantic contagion is another concept. And that's, social contagion, it spreads because your buddies are doing it, Semantic contagion is because of words. So when words that weren't even a part, of the vocabulary become common, they also start serving as lenses for you. They become their own worldview through which you examine yourself. So it's like, trans what? Well, now everybody knows what trans means. Like, oh, well, gee, I don't get along with so-and-so, maybe I'm trans. I like this, maybe I'm trans. It becomes the answer for everything. And one of the things they noticed with these groups talking to these parents is that, transgenderism became the catch-all diagnosis for any kind of, heartbreak or sadness or, mental health problem they were having, and transition was the cure-all solution, which of course it's not. They found the kids became increasingly distanced from family and friends. Anybody who was not trans-affirming, big gap. And the kids' mental health became worse as this was going on, not better. And, other people have told us about the hop, skip, and jump phenomenon where, okay, well, social transition, it didn't do it for me. And then the people in the community will be, oh, that's okay. It's always like that. It's the next step. Oh, puberty blockers. It's like, okay. Then after a while of that, it's like, well, that's not satisfying either. That's okay. It's part of the deal. Cross-sex hormones. And the compulsion to go to the next step gets greater and greater because the step you just didn't work, so it must be surgery that'll fix it.
Gosh.
Pre-existing in the literature, like for a long time, and the other side admits to it too, is that the regret would be 8 to 10 years out.
It would be 8 to 10 years before they regretted having surgery.
But it's like, so you're admitting this, surgery or anything else, right?
Anything else.
So it's like, so you're admitting it's there. And, some of the therapists or physicians involved would take the position, well, we're giving him 8 to 10 years of happiness, which ends with what? This doesn't really sound good. And, now, of course, with what's called, Lisa Littman is the one who coined the phrase for rapid onset gender dysphoria. And that's when a tween or teen comes out, gender dysphoric, saying they're trans. When there was absolutely no indication of that before. And way commonly, of course, it's in the midst of a bad family situation, a divorce, a death, especially if the divorce is messy and stuff, and that's how the kid handles it, Yeah. Other parents talk about, well, my kid's personality type was the kind that, this daughter would go to great lengths to avoid dealing with problems. Anything's better than dealing with the problem. And this became a dodge. It is in the professional literature, and I use it in my lecture, warnings not to prematurely affirm. Whereas culture, society, and the activists are saying, and the state of California, you affirm upon presentation. It's like, no. And this professional literature, this one I'm thinking of right now is out of, Scandinavia, saying, no, don't let a person's gender identification be an excuse to fail to evaluate this psychologically in the normal way you would any other patient, because it can be, it's phrased more professionally than this, but it translates to, it can be a dodge. Transgenderism can be a dodge to avoid dealing with pain and their mental health problems.
Yeah, you're saying it. That's so good. Oh, man. So here's a confusing thing for a lot of us is like doctors are affirming this kind of care and people in a big authority are affirming it, politicians. What kind of, these are legit doctors, right?
And legit school superintendents. And they're not losing their job over this one. That kind of thing.
Yeah, like how, it's confusing. Like how could you be such a great doctor in these other areas and then all of a sudden you're affirming something that has so little evidence or scientific backing? How do they jump to there?
When this is being presented as the great human rights cause of the day, it came right on the tails of gay marriage.
Okay.
And it's like, this is the great, human rights issue. So if you're of that line of thought, it's like, okay, well, here it is.
You're not thinking evidence-based. You're just thinking like...
Well, to them it is, Thomas Sowell, the famous
he's amazing.
Economist. Yeah. And he points out, look, when someone comes to a conclusion through non-rational, non-evidence-based ways, It's an emotional conclusion.
Uh-huh.
Coming at him with rationality and evidence isn't going to change it.
Huh.
And we would look at that and say, well, there's also a spiritual warfare going on, isn't it?
Right.
That's part of the deal, and you need to be addressing it that way. For a lot of others, it's like, look, this took the medical community, the psychological community, the entertainment industry, by storm. They have been captured. The medical organizations, especially in America, have been captured by this ideology and the people and the rich organizations behind it, and they are wealthy. So from their point of view, it's kind of like, what do I do? I don't think this is right, but I'm going to pass this kid on to the specialists who handle it. I'm not losing my job over this, and it can happen quickly, as people have found out, which is, I wrote an article in 2018, Transgenderism is a state-sponsored religion, approaching it as this is Gnosticism, and it's being enforced by the government. California attorney picked up on that, and she wrote me a thank you letter and wrote her own article on it. But that's what happened. And in fact, the Babylon Bee just this week had a, as they do, a tremendous piece,
satire,
talking about it as an angrily enforced, vindictive state religion.
Yes.
And we see how it very much is. So there's the true believers. There's the people that know better, but they're afraid. What do I do? I can lose my job over this.
Uh-huh.
There's the people who don't know what to do, and then there's the others, and I'm obviously a part of the others.
Yeah. So we need the others, like you, to stand up and be willing to lose their job.
The big fight's on right now, and I use the example. There's a documentary I was part of. Anybody can see it on the web. Transmission: Why the Rush to Affirm Kids, put out by the Center for Bioethics and Culture out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm in it. Several of my colleagues are. The documentary ends with Quentin Van Meter, who's a pediatric endocrinologist, also an academic in Atlanta area. And he's talking about a conversation he had with Professor Paul McHugh. He doesn't mention him by name. He says the emeritus professor and chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University. 40 years ago, when this was with adults, he's the guy that led the charge in the science that stopped the sex reassignment surgery clinic at Hopkins, subsequently all the other ones in the country too at the time. And so Quentin asks him, he goes, you were involved in this before. Now it's with kids, of course. How do you see this ending? And McHugh's answer to him, and by the way, McHugh was a co-author with me on that letter to the editor that I told you about in that one journal with the Brandstrom-Pachenkas thing, along with two other colleagues of mine. And he said, I'll tell you how this ends. It ends when the children and the families that have gone through this and come out on the other side don't just sue the doctors and the hospitals, but sue the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical firms, and I would add the biotech firms, that made this possible. That's when this changes. And, strong Roman Catholic brother that he is, our core group was looking at it as like, well, hang on to that as a prophetic word, And in the past 2 years, I see it happening. And the lawsuits have started. There's the 3 people in California suing the Kaiser system. And that's interesting because Kaiser Hospital is also a chain, is also an insurance company. So it's exactly what McHugh was talking about. There's some on the East Coast, like the Carolinas, that are suing. Very important case happening in New England that names in it 2 of the top pro-trans peeps, another gal out of Oregon. And see, what we're looking for is for the social contagion to be for people to sue the entities that made this possible and ruin their life. We want to see insurance companies paying for regretters and detransitioners and taking care of them forever, not just getting them screwed up. The pharmaceutical firms that were part of this, when we talked about that the prevalence of this stuff, of gender dysphoria, should be, thousandths of 1%, and now it's 2 or 3% conservatively, right? The kids say that. That means your market share has increased 1,000-fold. That's why the pharmaceutical firms, not all of them, but why pharmaceutical firms are in this, biotech firms. If you make some kind of widget that helps, a man present more as a female or vice versa, big money in this for you, and so on and so forth. They need to pay for what they did. And, and what we're already seeing, and there's a law firm that just started in Texas exclusively to handle the cases of detransitioners. And I'm in contact with three, the California law firm, the Texas one, and one out of Florida, providing them information whenever I get it to keep them up to speed on stuff, as some of my other colleagues are doing too.
Yeah.
But, you know, as this builds, even before, you know, the big house of cards comes down, we're seeing insurance malpractice rates go up on the gender clinics. There have been several gender clinics close because their malpractice rates went too high. Insurance actuarials don't give a rip about ideology. They care math and they care dollars. And, you know, they're seeing the writing on the wall. Here's what it figures out to. Your rates are going up. Well, your rates need to go way up. This invites the question, so why are university hospitals doing this? Why are, you know, the endocrine, and for kids, you're generally talking the mental health division and the endocrine division, right? Peds endocrinology, which before maybe was taking care of more of, you know, kids with diabetes or this hormone problem or that. Well, peds endocrinology divisions of university hospitals were money losers. They'd always be in the red. But if they do gender medicine, they're way in the black.
So it's just, this whole thing's being driven by money.
Big money. Yeah. So what's going to be left is, you know, bad mud on the face of the medical organizations, the mental health organizations, academic, university, and they deserve it, you know. And we're at a time right now where Americans kind of as a whole kind of don't trust any pillar of government. They feel they've been betrayed in a lot of ways. And this is just going to be icing on the cake for that. So, you know, one of the things I've kind of long said is what's going to happen now really requires the church. Because, you know, imagine the anger of people that have been burned by this. It's like, oh, I had other problems and you didn't. What? You know, you recommended I do this. Now I can't have kids. Now I can't have orgasms. Now, you know, what do I do to fix myself? You can imagine the very justified anger, you know.
100%.
And by the way, look at how the trans community, you know, encourages anger and angry action as it stands right now. So their wrath is going to need the church to show them a better way. And in that way will be a benefit to society too. But I don't know anybody else who can do it. You know, really? They're going to trust the psychologists that led them down the garden path to this? And we know they don't go back to the gender clinics, the doctors and the surgeons who did this to them. And we also know that the other doctors they'll go to won't have a clue what to do. How do you handle this? You know what I mean? It's like, I wasn't doing the gender medicine. I just referred you. I don't know what to do. Those are some of the questions that I get sent to me from different organizations. Hey, where's a doctor we can send somebody to that specializes in detransitioners?
There isn't one.
There isn't one.
You gotta,
Yeah. So there's certain principles that can be applied. I helped an international organization based in the UK generate a very simple set of overarching principles, working with, you know, some psychiatrists and psychologists in their organization to help them with their standing before the government of, you know, here's what we think, here's what we propose, and we're legit. There's other groups working on it. In terms of, you know, what's really going to be in the way is everybody's afraid that touching these people means they'll be sued for conversion therapy. It's like, well,
talk about that one.
Yeah, well, I don't know anything more conversionary than the chemical you know, sterilization and surgical mutilation of an able-bodied young person because of a mental health problem that usually goes away by adulthood. But there's laws out there. You know, conversion therapy it's a misrepresentative name. It's a jamming tactic. But what it means is, you know, anything you do to help somebody with undesired sexual feelings, you know, undesired same-sex attractions, that kind of thing, to try to come up with a better way, to try to be more functional. It's counseling. It's talking. But the activists, society, and the legislatures have believed that somehow it's involuntary, it's torture. You know, there's bogus movies out there. You know, based on a true story, which means they're not. You know? But that's what they're talking about with conversion therapy. And, of course, the activists will say, well, you're trying to detransition, a transgender person. That's conversion therapy. No, it's not. And we have the courage to say it's not.
Yes.
We're addressing the underlying needs.
The pain.
And this is a person coming to us. They have some autonomy in this. They have the right to say, hey, I want some help. Thank you. So our advice to the mental health people is you deal with this person like you do any other client that comes before you. You investigate. What are the mental health problems here? Depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, personality disorder, like you would anybody else. What are the underlying traumas? That's what you do. If it makes you more comfortable to say, hey, our ground rule will be we won't discuss transgenderism at all, just anything else. Do it that way. So that's how you help address the mental health stuff. What about on the physical level? Well, if they went all the way to surgery, of course, it's like, what's gone is gone. I'm glad you came to your senses, but what's gone is gone. Some things can be done surgically, but you can't replace lost testicles, lost ovaries, lost uterus. You just can't. Most of the stuff will actually just be in between. What do you do hormonally? It's a medical question, but it's much simpler. What do you do with the puberty blocker? You go off it.
Right.
Yeah, but what about, no, that's what's done with anybody. You just go off it. When these same medicines are used for prostate cancer, you go off it. When they're used for someone with precocious puberty, you just go off it. And then your own hormonal axis kicks in within a year and a half or so. What about somebody who's on cross-sex hormones? It's a little more complicated, but the one gets weaned down as the other gets weaned up, and it can be done in not too many months. And it's kind of not a big thing for an endocrinologist. So it's not like these are unsolvable problems. But when you've got medical people and mental health people terrified to touch it because I'm going to get sued, that's no help. And it's the other side that helps set that environment that's making it so hard to help them.
Right. If we had more, can I go back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing up? If everybody stood up, we would find, I believe, an overwhelming amount. There's more for us than there is against us.
Yeah, I think it was Billy Graham who says, well, when a person stands up, other people's spines start to straighten.
Yes.
And that's it. And then the other part, and this is where we get kind of sarcastic, and my teammates have heard me say this like 100 times, it's going to be like France after World War II. That all of a sudden everyone has their story of their experience in Le Résistance, and they were nowhere to be found in Le Résistance when it was called for. Everybody's going to be the winner, everybody will be the hero, and it'll be lies, but it's like, just forget it.
Yeah, just stand up right now. Just start. And so I love this. This is great. I really wanted to just get you to hear it, to unpackage this for pastors, leaders, parents, so they can actually understand what's going on, and that the solution isn't found in, if somebody's going through this or if a kid's facing this, it's not found in medical help. It's found in Christ alone. Yeah. It's found in the gospel. And that's always been the solution since the beginning of time. And it's just like...
there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Right.
Things just kind of come back in different forms.
Yeah. We've seen kids. I mean, I was a youth pastor for almost 20 years, and we've seen kids come, and they're confused. They're believing lies. And the preaching of the cross, lifting up Jesus, the Spirit of God, he knows what he's doing to help a kid get healed and get whole. I was just talking to a kid just last weekend who's reached out to me. He just desperately wanted to get free from homosexuality. And I sat there and talked to him for a minute and basically got to the point where I looked at him and I said, "You're not gay." And he was like, "What?" I said, "You're not gay. You need community with loving fathers who just want to listen to you and be there for you, but you have a sex drive and you want to have sex because you're a man, but it's just you're believing lies." I saw hope coming into this kid's mind. But I think as pastors, if we listen to the spirit of fear telling us you could get canceled, you're going to get the mob after you, or the man, I don't want to say something that's harmful or whatever, so I'm not going to say anything, we are not being a part of the solution. We have to stand up and be a voice in the middle of this.
Yeah. And since you brought up gay ideology, I'm sure there's some people that are listening that are like,
please,
what are you talking about? There's obviously people that are gay. This is another example of weaponized language.
Yes.
My approach to it to say is this is a category error. There is no straight. There is no gay.
Yes.
I'm not straight. You're not gay. These are ideological expressions of the mid-20th century that were intended to frame your thinking. And
Yes.
obviously, they've been radically successful.
Right.
Same with heterosexual and homosexual. That's out of England, out of the 1800s. Somebody came up with it because they thought they were protecting one of their friends. And it was always ideology from the start. There is no straight, there is no gay. Again, these are category errors. We have male and female created in the image of God. And now, of course, with the transgenderism, we see how male and female is being challenged, of course. But, yeah, like you said, everyone has a sex drive. But for all of human history, until that mid-1800s, sexuality was a verb, not a noun. It's what you did, not who you were. It's behavior, but, not your identity, not your
Yes.
personhood. But now that we're thinking of it differently, again, the same thing, kids perseverate on this. One gay guy who, went into the ministry wrote a fabulous paper, on this, explaining it. And it's how, today kids, this is the thing I say in the school of ministry to kids, by the way. But, it's like, oh, I like this, I don't like this. Am I gay? Am I straight? Well, it's like, those words have no meaning. This is all ideology.
Yes.
A harsh example, that I give to the kids in the school of ministry, I'm talking to the first year, is like, okay, don't get embarrassed, but here we go. Me as a teenager, I'm hanging out, spending the night with my friends, We circle jerk, mutual masturbation. I feel bad about it the next day as a Christian. But nothing in me in the early 1970s made me think, oh, I must be gay. That wasn't on the radar, But you've been brought up, and even as I'm talking to you, you'd be afraid not to consider that you're gay because you're not a bigot, you're not a hater, you're not a phobe. You see how you've been played.
Yes.
And you think your opinions are very moderate, very centrist, neutral, and they're not. They're actually way to what we'd call the left, the revisionist. But you haven't been given a chance because you've been indoctrinated your whole life without even knowing it.
Gosh.
I had one guy, come up to me afterward who had been to a big-time Christian college, and he's like, that's exactly what happened to me. It hit me like a train, but I hadn't thought of it this way before. It's like, yeah.
This right here is, we could do a whole nother podcast on that one thing you just talked about right there. Because it's so true. Like the framework, it's like, oh gosh, I could just go off on this. The framework of homosexual, heterosexual, gay, straight, all that is like, yes, it's so like, they've framed all of society around this thing.
Yeah.
And they don't even exist.
And for people that have, this is how they came to terms with everything, this is how they handled it, You challenge that, it's instant insecurity and anger.
Right.
Because it's like, oh, you're reshuffling my deck. I don't think so. Who are you to tell me who I am?
Right.
You're erasing me. It's like, no, the erasure, you did that. I'm trying to bring you back to you.
Right. Gosh. That is, we need that voice in America. And it's just like, wow. I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
That's really, you just don't, nobody is saying today, gay does not exist. Homosexuality is a made up construct that,
Instead, they're saying sex is a construct.
it's all weaponized language, isn't it?
Very much.
And if you challenge the weaponized language, you're a racist, a bigot, a homophobe, you're all these things, you're just a bad person.
And what's so interesting, a bigot is someone who won't tolerate an opinion they don't share.
But that's exactly
It's usually
what's
the people
happening.
calling you a bigot.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
It's so demonic.
Yeah,
is
that
what
too.
it just comes down to. It's just lies and demonic. And we can't be afraid of this demon spirit is what it is that is trying to silence our voice.
Yeah. And maybe a good way of approaching it when someone, comes at you like that and say, you're denying me, you're la la. No, I'm saying you're more than that. You've always been more than that.
Yes.
You've got something else to consider.
Wow. That's so good. It's so good. Last question. Do you feel like the tide in America is like turning, or are we right here? Is it like here, or where do you feel like we're at right now?
The tide is turning. The trans thing is turning strongly, but the old maxim about the light burning the brightest right before it burns out.
Yeah.
The other side's doubling down on everything, and it's messy, but we're going to win this. And then the next thing we're going to win is striking down these conversion therapy laws, because they're all based on falsehood, false conceptions, horror stories, extremist examples making it sound like it's the norm. And there's no other country that can do that but the United States. So that's going to be quite a fight too. But again, when it happens, a very confused public is going to need a lot of explaining. And the church needs to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's nothing new under the sun. We're not talking about problems that haven't beset people before.
Mm-hmm.
And, on subjects of sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
dang, for sure that's not new.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the kids are taught to think, this is the first generation that cares about justice and truth and whatnot. It's like, come on. I'm sure everybody thinks that when they're a kid. But again, this mess we're in, this too shall pass. But
the next one will come too.
Yeah, and the church needs to be in the right way and in the right place and present. Maybe stop with this. There's these quotes I like to put at the end of my lectures.
Yes.
Just because they've been so helpful.
Yeah.
One is by journalist Mark Stein: "The future belongs to those who show up." It sounds funny and silly, but it's true, and it's true for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Then Havilah Cunnington, our church mate.
Yeah.
You win by outlasting the crowd. You may not look good, muddy, beaten up, bloody, but last person standing is last person standing.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one is by Ade Amuba, a pastor in the UK who I believe has been knighted for all of the contributions he's made to the UK. And he says, to stand is to win. As soon as you made your stand, you did it right, you've already won.
Yes.
So show up, outlast the crowd, stand.
Simple.
Yeah.
Just do it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I really greatly appreciate your work, your convictions, and your boldness and courage to make such a significant contribution for really America and the world right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Boom.
Yay. I think that's the best interview.